Bonjour, Kinamagin in Ireland Indigenous. Welcome to this Tier 2 reading intervention. Today, you will be viewing a reading of this week's text. Stay tuned for the mythical creatures of ancient Greece. Before I begin the video, you are welcome to follow along in your text, putting together a connection between the words that you hear spoken and the words that you see in your book. This text will be used for 3 different sessions, but this video will cover only a reading of the text. Please enjoy the video.
Mythical Creatures of Ancient Greece. Written by Elizabeth Jane Pistilnik. Illustrated by Timothy Truman. Focus question. What are some mythical creatures of ancient Greece, and what do they represent in that culture? Introduction. People in many cultures have myths. Myths are stories that explain important ideas, such as good and evil, in ways people can understand. A myth can take many forms: a lesson, an explanation of a historical event or natural phenomenon, or even a warning. In ancient Greece, myths were an important part of religion. They weren't told as entertainment. Rather, stories about gods and goddesses had deep meanings that Greek people used as guidelines for their lives. While gods, goddesses, heroes, and villains are the stars of Greek myths, fantastic creatures often play a central role as well. Centaurs. Centaurs had the head and chest of a human and the body of a horse. These violent creatures' animal side dominated their human side. Centaurs used giant stones and wooden sticks found in nature as weapons against the Greeks' metal shields, spears, and swords. To the Greeks, the untamed centaurs represented the direct opposite of their own culture. Centaurs were animal-like and were driven by their emotions, while the Greeks considered themselves to be civilized and driven by reason. The story of the centaurs began with a Greek king named Ixion. Zeus had allowed Ixion to live among the gods and goddesses on Mount Olympus. Zeus heard a rumor that Ixion had fallen in love with Hera, Zeus's wife. As a test for Ixion, Zeus created a cloud that looked exactly like Hera. Ixion indeed fell in love with the cloud, thinking it was Hera. The cloud gave birth to the first centaur, and angry Zeus punished Ixion by forcing him to rotate around and around on a blazing wheel forever. Pictures of battle scenes showing Greeks fighting centaurs were commonplace in ancient Greece, on everything from drinking cups to stone temples. The Greeks rarely showed current events in their art. Rather, they used pictures of myths to express how they felt about what was happening in the world around them. For example, the Greeks connected one of their greatest enemies, the Persians, with the wild nature of the centaurs. They portrayed great battles with Greeks fighting the centaurs to show their superiority over the Persians. Do you know? Honoring the relationship between a guest and his or her host was an important part of ancient Greek culture. The myth about Ixion and the first centaur shows the importance of this relationship, through Ixion's disrespect of Zeus, his host. Zeus's punishment was a lesson about the consequences of breaking this accepted custom. Sirens. Like centaurs, sirens were hybrid creatures. Sirens were women with the wings, legs, and bodies of birds. They represented the importance of self-control. They lived on an island in the middle of the sea where they sang beautiful songs to lure sailors. The sailors would lose control of their ships and crash onto the island's rocky shores. According to myth, the sirens had once been human maids to the goddess Persephone. Hades, god of the underworld, abducted Persephone to make her his wife. Their wings helped the sirens search for Persephone. Unsuccessful in their search, they settled on the island. The sirens killed many unsuspecting sailors, but a few sailors passed by them alive. The famous Greek musician, Orpheus, played music so loud that it drowned out the siren's song. The Greek king Odysseus, on his journey home from fighting in the Trojan War, instructed his sailors to tie him up tightly to the mast of his boat. His sailors plugged their own ears so that they wouldn't be tempted to stop rowing. The Greeks prided themselves on their restraint. Resisting the siren's song represented the strength of will that ancient Greeks valued. Word-wise, the mythological sirens are connected to the word siren, which is a device that gives off a loud warning sound. They also inspired the meaning of a siren song, something so appealing that it makes you want it, even if it is dangerous. Medusa. While the sirens were known for their beauty, Medusa was famous for her frightening appearance. Greek artists usually showed the Gorgons, Medusa and her two sisters, with large round heads and huge staring eyes. Snakes instead of hair grew out of their skulls. Pointed tusks, flared nostrils, and tongues sticking out of their mouths completed their features. Although Medusa's sisters were immortal, she was mortal. This made her vulnerable to humans. She had her own defense against attacks, though. She could turn people to stone once they looked directly into her eyes. The myth about Medusa began with an evil king who was in love with the mother of a boy named Perseus. To get Perseus out of his way, the king tricked Perseus into promising that he would bring anything the king wished. The king sent Perseus to kill Medusa and return with her head, a deed the king thought would be impossible. With the help of gods and goddesses, Perseus cut off Medusa's head. From her body, two creatures sprang forth. They were Chrysaor, a giant whose name means golden blade, which could refer to grain, and Pegasus, a winged horse whose name refers to springs of water. Some people think the killing of Medusa symbolized the ending of a drought, and that Chrysaor and Pegasus represented the good things that came afterward, thriving crops and flowing water. Wowzer! The ancient Greeks believed that the frightening faces of the Gorgons would protect them and ward off evil. They put pictures of Gorgons everywhere, including on their shields. The Minotaur. The Minotaur was another hybrid creature. It had a bull's head and a man's body. Its name came from Minos, the king of Crete, where the Minotaur lived, and Taurus, the Greek name for a bull. The monster was so destructive that it was kept in a twisted maze called the Labyrinth beneath the king's palace. After Athenian boys killed the king's son, Minos sought revenge by attacking the city of Athens. To stop the attacks, the people of Athens agreed to send 7 boys and 7 girls every year, or every 9 years, the myths differ, to the terrible Minotaur. A brave Athenian boy named Theseus volunteered to be one of the victims. When Theseus arrived in Crete, he was put in a cage with the other victims. It was then that the princess of Crete, Ariadne, saw Theseus and fell in love with him. Ariadne didn't want the Minotaur to kill Theseus. She asked the man who built the labyrinth how Theseus could possibly escape. She was told that she should give Theseus a ball of yarn to tie to a door. He was to unwind it as he made his way through the labyrinth. She also gave Theseus a sword so he could kill the Minotaur. After Theseus killed the Minotaur, he followed the trail of yarn back out of the maze. The Minotaur myth was popular after the Greeks took over Crete. Just as centaurs often represented the Persians, bulls could stand for Crete. Bulls were considered sacred to an important goddess in Crete. Theseus defeating the Minotaur could have symbolized the Greek conquest of Crete. Typhon. The fierce Minotaur was tiny compared to the giant Typhon, a winged monster with 100 heads that represented the destructive forces of weather. Typhon had 1 human head and 99 heads of other creatures, including lions, bulls, boars, snakes, and dragons. Below the knees, his legs were giant snakes. Instead of fingers, 50 serpent heads coiled forth from each hand. Fire flashed in his eyes, and flames whipped out of his mouth. Only Zeus, the king of the gods, could match Typhon in battle. When Typhon threatened to take over the world, Zeus used thunder and lightning to combat Typhon's fire and wind. Their battle shook the whole world. Zeus set all 100 of Typhon's heads on fire. He then imprisoned the monster beneath earth. The ancient Greeks blamed Typhon for stirring strong winds that spread across land and sea during great storms. They also blamed him for sending forth lava from volcanoes. People were comforted by the idea that Zeus could defeat the destructive natural forces that Typhon represented. Conclusion. Mythical creatures did not simply entertain or terrify the ancient Greeks. These creatures and the myths about them had deep meanings that helped people understand the world around them at the time and cope with challenges they faced. Mythical creatures played significant roles in ancient Greek culture, and they're still popular today. Children and adults remain fascinated by their amazing stories. Connections. Writing. Write a short play about one of the mythical creatures from the book. Perform your play in a small group. Art. Make a decorative mask of one of the mythical creatures from the book.
We have reached the conclusion of that reading. You should continue checking each of the 3 posts this week for further instruction. Have a minagishigad. Minwa, bamapi.